Good morning and welcome to a new coffee break webinar. Today the topic will be microplastics. This is something that we already discussed about 2.5 years ago, and we're going to go a bit more in depth in how things are looking right now. At the end of the presentation, this webinar is being taped and it will be shared on a later moment. I will also provide all the information that is noted in the presentation, all the links and all the webinars that might be helpful for you guys. So let's start sharing the presentation and get the show on the road. So first off, we'll be discussing the introduction and a little part of the regulation. We already discussed this in our previous webinar, so if you need more information on that, I would suggest going back to the old webinar and looking further into that. Then we will discuss the guidance, the actual timeline for the moment, IFUT, registration, preventing plastic pellet loss, and eventual questions. So first off, short introduction, microplastics, what's the big deal about that? Well, it has been proven that the release of microplastics has an impact on the environment, but also on health issues. The regulation of the Commission that actually broadens the restrictions under REACH tries to put an end to the loss of microplastics in the environment and the possibility that this reaches your body. Speaking of the regulation, it gives a definition about synthetic polymer particles that shouldn't be placed on the market. It gives all kinds of information as to where to these particles should adhere. They are contained in particles and constitute at least 1% by weight of those particles, or build a continuous surface on particles. And B, at least 1% by weight of these particles has dimensions smaller or equal to 5 millimeters. So if you have a little sphere or a little cube, it has to be smaller than or equal to 5 millimeters in all dimensions. And for fibers, it's dependent on the length of the particles and the ratio with the diameter. When that's greater than 3, then you also have a microplastic. Well, this ban or this restriction doesn't apply to certain types of products. The first one being synthetic polymer microparticles that are used in industrial sites. It's not allowed to make, like, let's say, a dashboard for a car if you're not allowed to use the microplastics that are needed to build that dashboard. So there's an exemption for that. All the other products that are mentioned here, they have their own specific EU regulation, and as long as these products are conforming to their EU regulation, they are exempted from the ban. Other products that are also exempted are synthetic polymer microparticles that are contained by technical means. That's like toners or certain types of water filters or cartridges, which means that a synthetic polymer microparticle isn't able to get released into the environment. Microparticles whose physical properties are being changed in the use, like you have ironing plastic beads. This is type of beads that the kids use. They make a figure with it, they iron it down, and while the plastic melts, you get a larger figure, and thus the polymer no longer falls within the scope. Or polymers that swell up during use, like polymers in diapers that swell up, get larger than the intended descriptions for the dimensions, and they no longer fall into the scope. And then the microparticles that are permanently incorporated in a solid matrix. The best example for this is something like glitter glue. Glitter is restricted. Glitter glue can still be sold, as during its use and during the final end use, the glitter is actually captured within the dried out glue. So this is something that's exempted as well. This exemption is called 0.5 of the restriction A, B, and C. I'll have to get back to that in a later slide. So what's next? That was the introduction for a quick part of the regulation. Let's see what the guidance has to say. What we noticed after the first webinar that we had on microplastics, there was a large demand for more information on whether or not your certain type of product was a microplastic or not. So guidances were requested, and by March of 2025, we finally received those guidances, and they're intended to use the to help the stakeholders, but also the EU countries to implement new rules on that. The first part is narrative, so it describes certain parts of the restriction in 22 official EU languages, so that everyone within the EU can read the legal affairs or the legal background and whether or not this applies to them. Part 2 is a Q&A that was held while the restriction was being written. All types of questions that were coming from EU countries and from stakeholders like companies that had questions like, what's the intended purpose for this type of restriction? What type of product is going to fall under that? So all these types of back and forth is all described in part 2 of the guidance. Part 3, that actually has the decision trees that were also set up during the fabrication of the restriction. And they also have examples of borderline cases. The thing is that about half of the borderline cases that are being shown as examples are still under revision, so there's still no definitive decision on whether or not it falls within the restriction or not. Part 2 and Part 3 are only available in the English language. Timeline, which we also had in the previous webinar. So as of 2023, September 25th, the regulation was published, and it went into effect on the October 17th, 2023. Suppliers of microplastics on industrial sites have to give information into the supply chain as of 17th of October 2025. What information is that? Well, instruction for use and disposal, where you can help actually all persons in the supply chain behind you. Instructions for use and disposal, IFID. Also, you should have the statement that the synthetic polymer microparticle that you supply is actually within the scope of the entry of the regulation. Information on the quantity of concentration of the microplastics in that substance or mixture, and generic information on the identity of the polymers that were used. That should enable other manufacturers or other downstream users or suppliers to comply with their own obligations as mentioned in the restriction. Supplies of food additives and also the exemption 5ABC, so those polymers that were sealed in toners or that were sealed within their end use, like the rubber glitter glue. Those should also have instructions for use and disposal, explaining to professional users and the general public how to prevent release of the particles in the environment. Again, EFUD. That information can be provided through the safety data sheet, but since the general public doesn't have access to a safety data sheet, it's best to put that on a label, on the packaging, or to add a leaflet to the packaging with that type of information. As of 2026, there is an additional demand from the restriction. That is that those manufacturers and industrial downstream users that have microplastics on the market for industrial use, as of 2026, they have to register to ECHA. That means that by May 31st of each year, they will have to describe A, what type of microparticles are being used, B, the identity of the microparticle, and C, just how much the quantity of microplastics is that is released to the environment in the previous calendar year. So now in 2026, you have to describe what happened in 2025. Suppliers of in vitro diagnostic devices will have to adhere to the same regulation as that has been for the suppliers of food additives. So they will also have to give the information, or IFID, on the safety data sheet, on the label or leaflet. And further down the road and beyond, going on from 2027 to 2035, which will be the end phase of the restriction. Certain cosmetic products will come into play that will no longer be allowed onto the market. Granular infill that is being used on synthetic sport surfaces will also fade out. iFood, I mentioned it a couple of times. Sounds really funny. Instructions for use and disposal. Now I am quoting certain legislations here, or certain norms that can be used to find information on use and disposal. The best thing is to give some examples. That can be for industrial use only, product not intended for consumer use, do not empty into drains, surface water, or soil. Those are actually examples that you will also find in SDSs. So if you've already seen or read SDSs, then you will know that this is information that is already available. You just have to know the source where to look. As previously stated, at the end of the webinar, not only will the footage be shared, but we will also have all the links to all the sources that are being used in the webinar as well. Registration, and that's probably the thing that will have the most questions during the long run. As companies have to start registering all those manufacturers and industrial downstream users, there will be a lot of questions on how to do that and what information has to be submitted. The report has to be prepared in IUCLID, that can be in the software or online, and submitted through Reach IT. Each legal entity will have to file its own report, and the descriptions for use and end use will be defined in the ECHA document, Guidance on Information Requirements, Chapter 12, will also be added to the information links. Only ECHA and only member states that have competent authorities can access the information. There is no publicly accessible database or register that can be inspected. That information is all confidential. Then, preventing plastic pallet loss. That's actually a new legislation that came into force on November 12th, 2025. And that's just actually what it says. It's all about stopping microplastics from being released into the environment. The legislation describes which natural and legal persons have some kind of responsibility, what type of permits, certification and accreditation, who can inspect and who can enforce this legislation. Non-EU carriers will also have to have an EU authorized representative, just so that there's a spokesperson or someone to contact when there's extra questions, or when there is something that's going wrong and somebody has to take steps into solving those issues. This regulation is more to be seen as risk management, like certain ISO types of quality systems. It's all about identifying where you might have losses and who can supervise those processes and what you can do in bettering and enabling those processes. Preventing plastic pallet loss is actually a parallel legislation that works next to the microplastics legislation or the microplastics restriction. Please be aware that for PFAS, there will be a restriction, or there will be a new legislation by the end of the year. It's already being reviewed right now, and is expected by November 2026 to also go into effect. So if you have microplastics and they are PFAS materials, keep a lookout. If there are any questions, please call us or mail us. Every company is different, but so we'll have to see what's specific for your company. We can do an online meeting, and all the links will be shared together with the information that was added in this webinar. As there will be no questions at the moment, I will say we'll conclude it here, and we'll see you again next time with a new webinar. Bye.